A group of women in Russia are staging regular protests to demand the return of their husbands and sons from Ukraine. They have differing views on the war, with some claiming to support it and others more skeptical, but all are united in the belief that their relatives have done their fair share of the fighting and should be allowed to now come home.
Determined to get their men back, Maria Andreeva and a dozen other Russians whose husbands were mobilized want to lay flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier. This isn't a ritual but a protest. They want their husbands who have been fighting in Ukraine for more than a year to finally come home.
There is a war going on. People are dying there. Average people. Men who were called up during the partial mobilization. We can't pretend that they're not dying there.
She calls her women's initiative the Way Home. Maria Andreeva recently even took it to the campaign office of President Vladimir Putin near the Kremlin. Emotions ran high there.
Should my husband come back crippled?
Your husband is defending our homeland.
And what will I get back? A man without legs and arms? A sick man?
How are you talking about your husband?
You don't even know what's going on.
The women want to get through to Putin with their protests. The president, who in early January celebrated Orthodox Christmas with a select group of completely different women. Everything there was harmonious.
As you know, our brave, heroic men, our boys, the warriors of Russia are fighting for the interests of our country, even now, during the holidays.
The initiative has been around for months, but in recent days the women have sharpened their tone. At first they were not explicitly against the war, only in favor of their husbands coming back. Now they are demanding an end to the war.
It's symptomatic. We see similar anger in other areas of society. Young people are becoming increasingly dissatisfied. Pensioners are increasingly worried about rising food prices. The war is causing more and more consternation and tension. But that doesn't mean that people are ready to take to the streets en masse. It means they see the situation that Russia is currently in differently.
Couldn't this turn into a bigger movement?
The problem is that Russia is a very large country. To organize an all-Russian movement, you need proper infrastructure. These women have neither infrastructure nor a leader.
They refuse to give up. The women now take to the streets every Saturday, not only here in Moscow, but also in St. Petersburg.
We have to come back again and write lots of protest letters to exert massive pressure. Now is exactly the right moment to act.
That moment is the presidential election in less than 2 months' time. The Kremlin hasn't yet intervened in the protests, but that could change quickly.
More, I'm joined now by DW's Juri Rescheto, who filed that report. Juri was our Moscow bureau chief before DW was banned from reporting from Russia. Now joins us from Riga. Juri, what exactly do those women we saw in your report want to achieve with their protests?
Well, Terry, first and foremost, these women want what they call justice. They are pretty unhappy that their husbands are at the front for so long against their will, they say. This isn't about contract soldiers, but about mobilized men. The wives of these men want their husbands to come home immediately, and this is new. They are demanding an end to the war. In other words, we are talking here about a group of citizens in Russia who represent a part of Russian society that is against the war and therefore also against President Putin's policies. It's still difficult to estimate, Terry, how many people in Russia share this view, because all surveys are difficult in times of war. However, there is obviously a certain part of the Russian population that wants the end to the war.
It's difficult, of course, and risky to protest in Russia these days, Yuri, but these women are protesting openly, even in Moscow's Red Square. Are they not afraid of being arrested?
Well, I think the Kremlin is letting the women protest for two reasons. Firstly, because these women don't seem to be a real threat to the Kremlin so far. And secondly, because the Kremlin understands that a total ban on expression, one's opinion, is ultimately counterproductive. There are not yet thousands of women, but at most hundreds, who dare to protest in Moscow or St. Petersburg. In other words, it's not a yet mass movement. They might come insistently to Red Square in Moscow and to Marsovo Pole in St. Petersburg every Saturday, but they are not storming the Kremlin. And as soon as there are much more women, the Kremlin can quickly change their mind. Also, the police don't want to produce images of arrested women in front of the Kremlin now in the run-up to the presidential election. And that takes us to the second reason. The Kremlin understands that there has to be an outlet for people's anger, and from the Kremlin's point of view, it's better to control a dozen unhappy women than tens of thousands of supporters, for example, of the opposition politician Navalny, who took to the streets a few years ago.
Yuri, you say the Kremlin doesn't see these protests by those women as a threat, but could this not grow into a larger anti-war movement that's potentially dangerous for Putin?
Well, it's remarkable that the women are demanding an end to the war and not just a rotation at the front so that their husbands can come home. Nevertheless, there won't be a mass protest, I think. We've just heard it from the political scientists in my report. Russia is a big country and that every protest needs an infrastructure and a leader. But there is also, Terry, another much more, let's say, ordinary or banal reason. After more than 20 years of Putin, hardly anyone in Russia has any interest in politics. People live according to the motto, I do live my life and the state should leave me alone. In addition, there is much intimidation across the country. Plus, as long as Russians don't feel this war very clearly in their everyday lives, they won't take to the streets and protest against it. And the Russians hardly feel the war because all the Western sanctions are as good as useless. Russia is still doing pretty well economically. The only thing that could really worry people would be a new wave of mobilization, but that won't happen apparently, at least not before the election in March.
Yuri, thank you very much as always. That was our correspondent in Riga, Juri Rescheto.
Let's get more on this from DW reporter Alyona Murashova. Welcome, Alyona. So, these women, why are they speaking out now, given that this war's been going on 2 years?
Yes, Phil. So, because of disappointment. These women say that they're disappointed in the Russian president, and that's the main sentiment that I got while reading all the messages in this Telegram group. These women say that there is this dichotomy between what the president says and what's actually written in the decrees that he signs. So they also say that they had been lied to several times. So the first time when they were told that there would be no mobilization, the second time when they were told, well, there is mobilization, but your men will be gone for 3, maximum 6 months. And right now this decree is still in place, and it says explicitly that this man can only come back, the mobilized one, when the mobilization is announced. And I also spoke with some women and people there in Russia, and I asked them about what they think about mobilization. And some of them told me, but there is no mobilization anymore. And I asked them why they think so, and they said, well, it's been quiet. And that's a very tricky situation, because just because it's quiet, it doesn't mean that decree is not there. Right. The decree is there, and these women say that, please join us, support us right now, because today it's us, but tomorrow it can be any of you fighting for your man.
Right. And they have faced criticism, haven't they?
Yes, they have faced criticism from both sides of the aisle, I would say. So obviously the first side is pro-war activists, and obviously they blame these women traitors. They brand them as traitors. But also it's very interesting from these anti-war groups as well. And there are 2 main points of criticism there. So the first one is that these women, so to say, let their men go and fight. And these women say, well, we were apolitical before, and these are the consequences of that. We know that, we regret that, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. So we were basically lied to. But the second point, and it's very tricky here as well, some say that these women are not brave enough. So I read their manifesto, and they call for demobilization. They call for normalcy to be brought back to the country, but they don't specifically say that they want the war to end. They allude to that, but they don't say it specifically. So some praise their bravery, and at the same time, there are people who say, well, why can't they just say we're anti-war, we're anti-Putin? Well, for obvious reasons, because the political climate in Russia is very, very dangerous right now for that.
So how dangerous are they then? How scared are authorities that this could grow into something, this movement?
Well, I would say there are some signs of that, to be honest. So at least according to these women, some of them have been approached by FSB agents, and they say that these FSB agents, they try to exert some pressure on them, but they were surprised as well that this pressure wasn't as strong as they expected, and they have their own theory for that. They say that authorities might be scared to put too much pressure on these women because their men right now are fighting there. So they are already fatigued and tired, and they, of course, they would be outraged when they find out that these women are being basically put on pressure by the government there back in Russia. So these women say that these authorities are scared of the reaction of their men on the battleground. So the main goal of these women right now, that's what they say, they want to be seen by the Russian president, and they want demobilization to actually become a decree, to be real. So they say that the longer the war is ongoing, the bigger the group is going to grow. And right now it's more than 40,000 people there in this Telegram chat, so that the president has to see them at some point.
OK, thank you for that, Alyona. DW's Alyona Murashova. Thank you.
Thank you.